So today we'll discuss about various concepts related to JavaScript object. We'll touch upon object declaration and different way to access the object properties, for example dot notation, square notation. We'll touch upon the destructuring syntax and pass-by reference and how we can delete it, iterate over an object and get resetter and various object methods. So hope you will enjoy this video today. So let's start about discussing about object declaration. As we are aware, like this object is a simple collection of key value pairs. So these key are known as object properties sometimes, and these are the values. So in the left hand side we can define any numbers or any data type, but internally the JavaScript object will store the key as a string. So the object properties or the type won't be preserved. So the values, you can have a string or the number or anything else, or you can have a nested object also. So it can be any type. And the data is on order. So if you try to loop it, so there is no guarantee that name will come at the top. So there one may come top and the order may be some undefined. But recently the ES standard, they are trying to give some kind of standardized. But earlier legacy browsers are having completely unordered data type. They don't follow the insertion order. And the keys are must be unique, so you cannot have a duplicate key. And to access like object properties, we can use like dot notation, which is more universal and commonly used, tweet.name and tweet.follower, and you can access the nested properties using the tweet.follower.count if we have this properties available. And also we can access using this square bracket notation. This is not very prevalent or not very commonly used. So if you know the key or object properties, it is always recommended to use dot notation. But this square bracket notation has very interesting aspect to it. You can pass a dynamic key over here, but for example you retrieve some key from API call and your key is dynamic based upon certain other criteria. So you can construct the variable and you can pass it across, so you can get the value of it, so which can be used in a very dynamic or very interesting use cases. So let's use that example till now and we'll come back to again here. So here we define this tweet object, which has three properties: name, follower, and the number one. This number one just to demonstrate the concept. Like if you try to, in this tool I don't need to type console.log in most of the cases, so it is printing, but you can use console.log wherever you want. So as I said, in this keys are stored as a string. See, we pass this as a number, but internally it is stored as a string. And the insertion order, we've inserted name as first element, but while returning it doesn't follow the insertion order, so one written at the beginning. And to access the any keys, we can use dot notation, tweet.name, the profile, and tweet.follower. This is the value we can retrieve. Also we can access using the square bracket notation, and we can use follower. Okay, so as I said, this we can use as a dynamic value also. Like for example, we define a constant or any variable like x, for example. Here we set a value name. So instead of this dot follower the key explicitly, we can pass this x, and this name will be substituted and this profile will be written. And we can specify any type over here. For example, instead of follower we can create a object. So we can have this nested object inside one more object, and to access it we can use tweet dot follower.count. In this fashion, we can access these values. And now we know how to access this tweet, like tweet.name and tweet.followers. For example, if you want to extract like two variable only, and you can use the object destructuring syntax, like in the left hand side you can use like curly bracket, and you can define like individual properties name, for example name followers. So inside your program you no need to do tweet.name tweet.followers. So few people prefer to give the explicit name along with the object name, and few people try to give the variable name and use across wherever they want. This name may not be very suitable example because this may be misleading or confusing, because there may be some other place you have used name variable, but I think you get the sense. So instead of using tweet.name, tweet.followers, once you use this object destructuring syntax, you can use name and followers directly. Also, like you can construct another object from the variable already available. For example, name here, we don't need to explicitly give like name colon name. That would be more full form syntax. This is more as a shortened syntax. This is recently introduced, which will simplify the code a bit. So you can give name followers, the value itself it will take from here, and it will construct a LinkedIn object. And this is the final thing, is like how do you create an empty object creation. So there are two ways basically. One is using the curly bracket, whatever we used till now, and another one is using the new keyword and object class or prototype. So using this new object we can create this empty object, but I don't see most of the people using this syntax, so you should be good enough to using this curly bracket wherever appropriate. So as I already discussed, like using in the left hand side of the curly bracket notation, we can use object destructuring syntax, and tweet we can just break it up into the individual component, or this assign it to the name value variable and follower variable. And if you try to access name, then this will contain profile, and if you try to access follower, this will contain this object like count 100, right? So we can access easily effectively anywhere like that. And for example, we want to construct another object. So basically what the way we used to do earlier, like using the full hand syntax like name and name. So then we can print this object. This is a very valid syntax. There is no problem with that. Few people still prefer it, but if there is no need, if the variable or properties name is same, you don't need to give again and again. So only the shortened syntax you can use, only this name you can give, and LinkedIn will be created. So if you want to have the two properties, you can just have the follower as well. So this will be created, the object in this fashion. So follower object will be also created. Okay. So in this case we are destructuring, in this case we are constructing this syntax. And like as I already said, like how we can create a empty object like this, there is no mystery to that, but you can also create like using this new keyword. And if you try to print it, so this is plain simple object. So this is one of the very important concept, like let me simplify a bit. Here we define a object like tweet with type one properties name as profile. This is where we define a function change. We take one variable insta, and inside that insta we are changing this one of the key name, its value to Steve, and we are calling this change, passing this tweet object and trying to print it. So basically whenever we are trying to call a function, usually we don't expect this the object which is created outside should not be changed. That is our most of the time expectation. We don't want like this method is, let's say we exported from some kind of module, a third party library, and if we try to magically change this our own object, it is not fun, right? It should do whatever it want to do, it should return it, but JavaScript works in different manner. So whenever we are trying to pass this tweet object, a reference will be copied over. The value won't be copied. So both tweet and Insta will point to the same location, or the address will be set across both of them. So the Insta, the name will be changed. So this particular name will be changed also because this tweet and Insta are pointing to the same place. So this is why known as password reference. So whenever we try to print this tweet.name, it won't reflect profile, but it will have this new updated value of Steve. So inside the method, we can change this object properties. So you should be very careful about it, about understanding this and using it appropriately. So let's see how it is behaving. So actually I don't prefer to type the code because that will, I feel, a little bit time waste. So let me show this example. This is a tweet object. Here this is the change method, and here we are calling this method. So as I already said, tweet, we are passing this as the object, and Insta and tweet will point to the same location. Let's say this is available into the memory in some place, and Insta and tweet just contain the address. So inside this, if you try to access this name value to Steve, this particular thing also will change. So if you try to print after this tweet value, so it should contain profile or Steve. Yeah, you guessed it correctly. It will contain Steve, Let's see that how it will be behaving. Steve. So the object is always passed by reference. Now let's try to discuss some of the very nice utility. So let's say you want to delete like the name key or property. How you can do that? There is a delete keyword. Using the delete keyword, you can delete it. It is very useful. Sometimes not recommended. It has some side effect if you try to delete like array items and some other thing, but we'll discuss that later. So we can delete the tweet.name, so it will work properly. So it will delete that name property, so it won't be present anymore. Okay, let's say we try to tweet.random key, which is not existing property we're trying to access, it will give an undefined. But if you try to do tweet.random key dot something also, then it will lead to error. Okay, so let's say if you define tweet as a constant, basically the constant means we should not able to change this value. But because this kind of tweet work as an object and it is just pointing the reference, so we can change the value or the properties, the value for its own individual key or properties. So together tweet we cannot assign it, but tweet follower we can change this value to something else. So we can declare it as constant, but it is mutable. The individual values for its own properties or key we can change. So we'll see some example, but it is very important concept to understand. And using this for in, it is not off. Okay, off is very useful for iterating over the array, but this for in is used to iterate over the keys. Like tweet we have like name, follower. So if you try to print it, the key will be printed, name and followers. Okay, so now let's see that example. Here we again come back to our original tweet object. So this is how it printed. Like let's say if you want to delete tweet dot name, then interestingly this particular thing will return true or false. If it can able to delete successfully, then it will return true. If it doesn't find this a key, so it will it is returning true. I will come back to it later, but there are few cases it will return false as well. Okay, and if you try to access this tweet again, so which will contain this object, but the name would be missing here. Okay, if you try to access like something non-existence properties, so let me print it. So which will contain undefined. Okay, so if this a is not present and if you try to access it, it will contain undefined. But if you try to access using again we want to access, so it will lead to error. So cannot read property a of undefined because this is undefined. So if you try to access the nested property, it will lead to error. But recently they introduced optional chaining. If it is question mark, if this value is present, then it will return a proper value. If it is undefined, then it won't throw an error, because throwing error is not a good idea all the time. So you have to do null check, and you have to write lots of code. This is very interesting feature. And for example, this, let's say tweet is constant, right? So here if you try to print the tweet, like let's say it contains the follower is 7815. So this is a constant. So ideally constant means we think and our impression says that we cannot change these values. Value means what? Like these are the known as values. So the basic as beginner level, we must be assumed that we cannot change its values, but that's not right. So if you try to do tweet dot follower 10,000, so we can change it. There is no error here. If you try to print it out just after that line, let's see what is it contain. So 10,000, you got it. So tweet, even though it is constant, but its individual properties or value is mutable, so we can change it. But the constant, what it will say, like we cannot assign a new object to it. So assignment to constant variable is not possible, even though like a is colon to 1 or some new different object, we cannot assign it. But we can change its individual values of individual properties, or we can delete it and we can do some other operation. And like if, let's say for example, we want to print this keys. Let's say we got an object from a API call. We just want to iterate and we just want to know what are the keys are available, so that we can, only interested access couple of keys what we are interested. So for constant key in tweet see here, one name and follower. And if you see here again, it is not coming as a proper insertion order because the name should come first, but here one is coming first. There is no guarantee that it will return in a particular well-defined order. Okay, the insertion order doesn't matter. So let's see another. Now let's see about the getter and setter. This getter and setter are very interesting. There are some kind of special method, right? So here we define a object tweet. We have one property is the name, which contains the value profile. So here we define a getter and setter. So this getter and setter we can access using this as a simple property, like for example tweet.profile. This is the profile. This getter and setter should have the same name. Like profile we are using 2 times. Setter is just to update the value and getter is to retrieve the value. Okay, the accessing method is very important, or you should remember, like the way we are accessing tweet.name, similarly way we are accessing to tweet.profile, and the way we are assigning a value to a property like tweet.name, we can assign the property to the setter as well. So this will lead to very interesting use cases, so that we no need to expose this name if you don't want to. So we can create some kind of validation rules over here, and we can hide the implementation detail or some object property what we don't want. So we can mask it and we can do some interesting stuff over here. So for example, set profile prof. So here we can access this individual name using the this keyword. This dot name will point to this profile. Here we are changing this mixture.prof. Here we are passing as a Steve. Steve will go to the setter and Mr. Steve will be printed. And before, if you print to tweet profile, it will call execute this get profile. Hi, my name with the lowercase. It will be printed. So any operation we can do, but the accessing method is very important. And inside that we can access this is tweet object properties using this dot name, or we can set using this dot name. Okay. Now let's see that example. I copied the same code. Here we have a tweet object with the name properties. Like here we have the getter and setter, right? Before diving into the getter, how we access the name properties? Very simple, tweet dot name. So we return the profile. How we can access the profile? It is the object method, So we can use like tweet dot profile. Same as we are accessing this tweet.name. We are not using any bracket notation over here. So if you try to access using a function, so it will lead an error. Like tweet.profile is not a function, it is a getter. So we should use as just a property. So if you store in some other file and another developer is using it, so they won't have any clue about whether it is a key or it is a getter. So it will be hidden from them. So for example, if you do high profile, here it is converting this name profile to lowercase and high. So if you try to manipulate something here, oh, I did a typo. So hello profile will be written over here. Okay. And if you try to change these values, Steve, this name is modified. So if you try to access this again, this tweet.profile, hello Mr. Steve is written. At this time, if you try to print this tweet.name as well, so what it will contain? Profile or Steve? So it will contain this updated value, Mr. Steve. I think we have just added Mr. also here. So the name is not only contain the Steve, but it contains the Mr. Steve also. So this is how the getter and setter works. So final box, like again we come to the tweet object. We have one property's name, and how we can define a object method. So there are two ways we will discuss. One is using the newer version array syntax, and another one is traditional way. Like here we define like hi. This is the function name we define, and inside that this is very interesting concept in JavaScript. Like inside this object we can define the function and move around it, so that whenever we want to call that function, which will manipulate its own properties, so that function is itself available inside the object. So lots of algorithm, library or framework leveraging this concept very effectively and coming up with some interesting use cases. So here we are console log and hi, and this we are accessing this name. Inside this object properties, this refer to tweet object, so the profile will be printed. But inside this, this is the same way as arrow syntax, but here we cannot use this keyword over here in case of arrow syntax. To access this name properties, we have to use tweet.name. So this is the only difference you have to note over here. And whichever the syntax you prefer, you can use it, but there's object methods, So now let's see that example in action. Again, tweet object, we have created two functions over here. Like if you try to call tweet.hi, but this is not a getter, so we cannot access using tweet.hi. We have to call using the function call the way we're calling a function call tweet.hi. So which will print hi profile, right? And same way we can call this another arrow function. This arrow function syntax is recently introduced. So tweet.hello, so hello profile. So here tweet.object. If you try to use this keyword over here, so this will, I think this refer to not to this tweet object. That's what I'm trying to say. This will point to the global object. I think this globally, this Rosen is available somewhere. It's some magic, But anyway, I think this is not clear of refresh. So this is what is printing. So this will point to the global object, not to the tweet object. So here we can use like tweet. So this it will work high profile. So it will work as this. So basically this keyword in this context is not referred to the tweet object, it will refer to the global object. So better you should use like tweet.name so that you can access this hello high profile. Otherwise this kind of issues like whatever I face, if you're trying to access global, you never know where it is set, So hope you enjoyed today's video. Have a good day ahead. Bye bye.